The men standing on the deck of the USS Missouri that morning believed they were about to witness the final act of the deadliest war in human history. The date was September 2, 1945. The place was Tokyo Bay. Hundreds of Allied sailors lined the rails. Military officers from many nations stood shoulder to shoulder. Cameras waited. Journalists adjusted their notebooks. The world expected a surrender. What few people expected was that beneath the carefully planned ceremony, another struggle was taking place. It involved no guns, no tanks, and no aircraft. It was a battle of pride, honor, and tradition, and at the center of it stood General Douglas MacArthur. The morning air was cool. A light breeze moved across the gray waters of Tokyo Bay. Above the bay, low clouds drifted across the sky. The giant battleship USS Missouri rested quietly, but the atmosphere on board was anything but calm. Every man present understood the weight of the moment. 6 years of war, tens of millions of deaths, entire cities destroyed, nations exhausted. In a matter of minutes, representatives of the Japanese Empire would arrive and formally surrender. Yet even before the ceremony began, rumors moved through Allied circles. Some members of the Japanese delegation were unhappy with the arrangements. Others were deeply uncomfortable with what surrender represented. For generations, Japanese military culture had emphasized duty, loyalty, sacrifice, and honor. Many officers had spent years believing that surrender itself was shameful. Now they were expected to stand before the world and accept defeat. As boats carried members of the Japanese delegation toward the Missouri, observers studied them carefully. Every movement mattered. Every expression was noticed. Every gesture would be remembered by history. Among the Allied officers present, there was curiosity and caution. They had seen how fiercely Japanese forces had fought across the Pacific. They had witnessed battles on islands such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They knew how many Japanese soldiers had chosen death rather than surrender. Because of that history, nobody completely dismissed the possibility that some form of last-minute incident could occur. As the Japanese delegation climbed aboard the battleship, silence seemed to spread across the deck. Their dark formal clothing contrasted sharply with the uniforms surrounding them. At the head of the delegation was Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu. Despite a severe leg injury suffered years earlier, he moved forward with determination. Alongside him stood General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Imperial Japanese Army. To the casual observer, everything appeared orderly. Yet several Allied personnel noticed subtle details. Some Japanese officers appeared rigid. Their faces showed little emotion. Their posture was formal but distant. There was no visible warmth. There was no sense of relief. It was as if they were physically present while mentally somewhere else entirely. Then came one of the most fascinating tensions surrounding the ceremony. Many Western observers expected traditional signs of respect from the Japanese representatives. Boeing had long been associated with Japanese customs and formal interactions. Around the world, countless people imagined that defeated Japanese officers would arrive with heads lowered and bodies bent in visible submission. But history is rarely that simple. Several members of the Japanese delegation maintained strict military bearing. There was no dramatic display of humiliation. There was no public performance of shame. They followed instructions. They took their positions. Yet some observers interpreted their behavior as a refusal to offer the symbolic gestures many expected. The tension was subtle, but it was real. The mystery deepened because different people viewed the same actions through completely different cultural lenses. To some Allied personnel, the lack of visible bowing appeared defiant. To some Japanese officers, maintaining composure represented dignity in defeat. The gap between those interpretations created a moment of uncertainty. What would MacArthur do? That question mattered because the entire world was watching. Douglas MacArthur was not simply another general. He was one of the most recognizable military figures on Earth. His image was famous. His victories in the Pacific had made him a symbol of Allied determination. But on that morning, he faced a challenge unlike any battlefield operation. A battlefield has clear objectives. A surrender ceremony does not. The wrong reaction could create headlines across the world. A public confrontation could transform a ceremony of peace into a spectacle of humiliation. It could damage future relations. It could deepen resentment at precisely the moment when stability was needed most. MacArthur understood this better than almost anyone. To understand his response, it helps to understand the man himself. Douglas MacArthur possessed a powerful personality. He was confident. Sometimes critics called him arrogant. Supporters called him brilliant. Throughout his career, he had developed a reputation for commanding attention. Yet he also understood symbolism. He knew that moments could shape history as much as battles. In the weeks before the surrender ceremony, MacArthur had already begun thinking beyond military victory. Japan had been defeated. The next challenge was preventing chaos. Millions of Japanese civilians remained alive. Government institutions still existed. A shattered nation would soon need rebuilding. That meant the surrender could not simply be about punishment. It had to become the foundation for peace. As observers watched the Japanese delegation, they searched for signs of tension. Every glance attracted attention. Every movement generated speculation. The atmosphere carried the strange feeling that the war had ended, but emotions had not. Many Japanese officers arrived carrying invisible burdens. Some had lost friends. Some had lost family members. Others had dedicated decades of their lives to an empire that had just suffered catastrophic defeat. They were entering one of the most painful moments imaginable for military professionals. Imagine standing before the entire world while representing a nation that has lost everything. Imagine knowing cameras are recording your every movement. Imagine understanding that future generations may study your behavior. You can almost feel the pressure they carried. For some of those officers, the ceremony represented more than surrender. It represented the collapse of assumptions that had defined their lives. That emotional reality helps explain why certain gestures did not occur in the way outsiders expected. The mystery surrounding bowing often comes from assumptions made after the event. Popular stories sometimes imagine dramatic confrontations. They imagine angry officers refusing direct orders. They imagine explosive moments of open defiance. The reality was more complicated and in many ways more interesting. The tension existed because expectations collided. Western observers expected visible signs of submission. Japanese representatives focused on fulfilling formal requirements while preserving dignity. Those priorities did not always align. MacArthur recognized the danger immediately. He understood that forcing public humiliation would achieve nothing useful. Instead of focusing on symbolic displays, he focused on the objective that truly mattered. The surrender documents needed to be signed. The war needed to end. The transition to peace needed to begin. That approach reflected a larger strategy. MacArthur believed the occupation of Japan would succeed only if stability could be maintained. Revenge might satisfy emotions in the short term. It would not help build a peaceful future. As the ceremony progressed, the Japanese representatives stepped forward to sign the documents. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed first on behalf of the Japanese government. General Yoshijiro Umezu signed on behalf of the Imperial General Headquarters. The moment was brief, yet its significance was enormous. With those signatures, years of conflict officially came to an end. Then, representatives of the Allied powers signed in turn. MacArthur signed as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers. Representatives from the United States, China, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, and New Zealand followed. The process unfolded with remarkable discipline. No public argument occurred. No dramatic confrontation interrupted the ceremony. No attempt was made to force theatrical gestures from the defeated delegation. That outcome was not accidental. It reflected careful leadership. MacArthur later delivered remarks emphasizing hope, peace, and the possibility of a better future. His words focused on preventing future wars rather than celebrating victory alone. This is where the true answer to the mystery begins to emerge. When faced with concerns about posture, protocol, pride, and symbolic gestures, MacArthur chose restraint. He chose results over spectacle. He chose stability over humiliation. He chose the future over the emotions of the moment. That decision may seem obvious today. In 1945, it was not. The world had just experienced unimaginable destruction. Many people felt anger toward Japan. Many Allied servicemen had lost friends and comrades during brutal fighting across the Pacific. Public demands for harsh treatment existed in many countries. Against that backdrop, treating the surrender as a foundation for peace required discipline. MacArthur understood that defeated nations do not disappear. They continue to exist. Their people continue living. Their children inherit the consequences of decisions made by leaders. By refusing to turn the ceremony into an exercise in humiliation, he helped create conditions for a different future. The significance of that choice became even clearer during the occupation that followed. After the surrender, MacArthur became the central figure overseeing occupied Japan. His headquarters directed sweeping political, social, and economic reforms. New institutions emerged. Democratic processes expanded. Reconstruction began. None of those developments would have been easy if the surrender ceremony had created lasting bitterness through unnecessary public humiliation. Respect does not erase defeat. Defeat does not require humiliation. MacArthur understood the difference. Many years later, historians would study the surrender ceremony frame by frame. They would examine photographs. They would analyze eyewitness accounts. They would debate details of protocol and behavior. Yet one conclusion remains remarkably clear. The ceremony succeeded because leaders on both sides maintained discipline. The Japanese delegation fulfilled its responsibilities despite immense personal and national pain. The Allied leadership completed the surrender without turning it into a public spectacle. That combination prevented tension from becoming crisis. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the story is how close perception and reality can drift apart. People often remember history through dramatic myths. A story about officers openly refusing to bow and a furious commander forcing compliance sounds exciting. It feels cinematic. It creates clear heroes and villains. Real history is often more subtle. The genuine achievement was not a dramatic confrontation. The genuine achievement was avoiding one. MacArthur's response demonstrated a lesson that extends far beyond military history. Strong leadership is not always loud. Sometimes leadership means refusing to create a confrontation when one could easily occur. Sometimes leadership means understanding what matters and what does not. On the deck of the USS Missouri, the important issue was not whether every observer interpreted every gesture the same way. The important issue was ending the war. And that objective was achieved. As the ceremony concluded, the Japanese delegation prepared to leave the battleship. Around them stood representatives of nations that had spent years locked in deadly conflict. Yet the surrender proceeded peacefully. The war was over. Across the Pacific, families waited for loved ones to come home. Soldiers dreamed of civilian life. Cities began imagining reconstruction. Prisoners of war looked toward freedom. Entire nations prepared to enter a new chapter. Those hopes depended on moments like this one. The surrender ceremony was not merely paperwork. It was a bridge between war and peace. When historians discuss Douglas MacArthur, they often focus on campaigns, strategy, victories, and controversies. Yet one of his most important contributions may have been recognizing the significance of symbolism at the exact moment when symbolism threatened to become dangerous. He understood that peace required more than military success. It required wisdom. On that September morning in Tokyo Bay, some observers may have expected dramatic displays of submission. Others may have worried about possible disrespect. Some searched for signs of pride, others searched for signs of shame. MacArthur searched for something else. He searched for a path forward. That difference mattered. Because history remembers not the confrontation that never happened, but the peace that followed. The image remains powerful even today. The massive USS Missouri resting in Tokyo Bay. The representatives of victorious nations standing together. The defeated delegation signing documents that would end a global conflict. Cameras recording history. The world watching. And in the middle of it all stood a commander who understood that true victory is measured not by how thoroughly an enemy is humiliated, but by how successfully a lasting peace is built afterward. That is what MacArthur did when questions of pride and protocol emerged during Japan's surrender. He did not chase drama. He did not seek humiliation. He did not allow symbolism to overshadow the mission. He kept the focus on ending the war. In the end, that decision proved stronger than any display of force. The guns had fallen silent. The fleets were no longer advancing. The bombs were no longer falling. Yet one final test remained. Could former enemies take the first step toward a different future? On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, they did. And because leaders chose discipline over spectacle, one of history's most important ceremonies became remembered not for conflict, but for the moment the Second World War finally came to an end.